Let's begin our storyboarding with Part A, Module 1, where we discuss parts of the storyboard and what makes them effective. For example, we'll talk about things, people, faces, opening slide, and transitions. And we'll also touch on advanced topics such as poses and camera angles. Here's a really nice storyboard made by my Be a Hero team at the San Francisco State University Mobile UX Design Certificate course. As you can see, it opens up in the kitchen, and as we know, a lot of drama happens in the kitchen, so right away you can tell this is going to be a drama. So you can see this person standing in front of the refrigerator, and she sees breaking news from Crown Channel 4. There's a typhoon devastated the Philippines. She sees the reporting from the scene and says, "This is terrible. How can I help?" She pulls out her trusty phone and fires up a Be a Hero app, donates the money, and the money goes straight to the relief agencies and to help people recover from this terrible disaster. And then at the end of the storyboard, you can see she feels like a hero, and then the people that have suffered find the hero in her. So that's an example of a really good storyboard, and that's the kind of storyboard we're going to learn how to put together in this part of the course. But first, let's look at what does a typical storyboard consist of. There are several things. For example, things, people, faces, opening slides, and transitions. Let's start with things. Now, things are not very hard to draw. If you can draw a box and a circle, you can draw almost any gadget known to man or woman. You can see on the left side right there, there's basically just boxes and circles. And on the right side, you can see finished objects. It's a really, actually not very difficult thing to draw. Like I said, if you can do what I'm showing you here, you can add realism to any storyboard, because the realism actually doesn't come from the people and faces, which are really hard to draw for a lot of people, but it does come from these gadgets you can put in there. Next up, Will is going to show us how to draw a bicycle, which I think on a scale of 1 to 10, bicycle is about a 10 on difficulty of things you can draw in a storyboard.
Yeah, well, one thing I wanted to mention was that if you are getting down to draw something and you don't know what it looks like, this is not a test. You don't have to draw everything from memory and end up with a bicycle that looks like this, and you're not quite sure where all the gears and pedals connect. If you don't know, feel free to look it up on the internet and do a quick image search and try to figure out where all the gears and pedals connect, because this whole process is part of the research for your product. And learning how people fit into the various things that they'll be interacting with is really important. So feel free to look up if you need any details about products, like if you're going to draw something like a washing machine and you needed to find out where the buttons were located. It would be important to learn that now, so that when you're drawing people interacting with these objects, you'll have the interactions more close to what they actually will be. Fantastic.
So next up, we're going to show you how to draw people. Now, people, I personally have a really tough time with people, because I'm more of a left-brain person. My background is in development and software architecture. That's how I get into the UX, and we'll got kind of our own little journeys to take. So when I draw people, I just stick with literally the stick figures, the one on the very left. But if you feel a little more ambitious, you can move from to a slightly more complicated one, which is the box plot. This one was popularized by Dave Gray from the firm X-Plane. And the one on the very right is called a star drawing, and those are very common for sketchnoting. And sketchnoting is usually done on larger boards. So if you're doing a larger type of drawing beyond the sticky note, that's a really good option for you. With practice, these can be drawn very quickly in a variety of poses, and they look a little bit more filled in than the usual sticky figure. So the thing with the stick figures, though, is that's about as far as you need to go. We will show you how to flesh that out. But if all you can draw is stick figures, don't get discouraged. That really is all you need to do. For example, this is a really good storyboard shot from the minimalist master, Matt Feazell. And as you can see, this is an excellent shot. You can see exactly what's happening here. And it's all done with stick figures. And the stick figures wearing a variety of outfits so you can tell them apart. But what really is adding realism to this storyboard are all the objects that are scattered in the same frame. And that's, as we mentioned, if you can draw a circle and a box, you pretty much can handle most of these objects that are scattered on the screen. And next up, Will is going to show us how to draw some people in a variety of ways. Show us how it's done, please.
Sure. Well, everybody knows the basic stick figure. So you're just taking some lines and connecting them and making your person. And you can make them taller, shorter, any sort of pose that you need. And then the second simple person you can draw is a box figure. You just start out with a box, and then add their little head. You might want to give them a neck if you need to. Some little spindly legs below that, and then some arms. And that's another simple way to create a person. And the star people, that's another way where you can start out with a little head, draw on some arms, some legs. Another simple way I like to draw people is they almost look like a little thumb. You start out with the body, add a little head on top, some legs, some little arms. When you're drawing people, it can be a little tricky to put them in a pose that is useful for your drawing. Like when you're getting used to drawing people, it can be tricky to figure out how do you connect them to the objects around them. How do you get these arms in the right pose? You can either stand up and act it out and try to figure it out, or another simple thing I do is just draw the person, draw the object, and then just kind of connect it with the arms. And that usually looks pretty okay. You don't have to learn everything about anatomy to get the drawings to look okay.
Yeah, the one in the middle with the thumb, I think we should call this one No Neck Joe.
Oh, you can add a neck. That's always an option.
Excellent. So these are some simple ways you can add figures and people into your storyboard. So next up, we're going to show you how to draw faces. And this is a great resource, again, if you want to really get professional and get really good at what you're doing. This is a good book to look at. This is See What I Mean, How to Use Comics to Communicate Ideas by Kevin Chang from Rosenfeld Media. And this next screenshot comes from that book. As you can see, there's some really basic faces in here, but there are also some more interesting ones. For example, being able to tell when somebody is surprised in a good way or surprised in a bad way. If you can do that, then you're kind of achieving this next level of mastery. And the way that Kevin has done this is through the use of eyebrows. And eyebrows is one of those things that most people don't look at when they're thinking of a basic stick figure face drawing, but at the same time, they're extremely expressive. So by just adding eyebrows to your drawing, you can go from happy to angry to surprised and so forth, variety of expressions, and adding this nuances that sometimes are very difficult to convey. So that's the trick that we use, especially us, the left brain people, use to add some realism to the drawing. Get those eyebrows down. So next up, Will is going to show us how to do that and add some faces to the stick figures that he's done before.
Yeah, we have these 6 people, and unfortunately they don't have faces. I've seen it with designers before where they can be a little bit apprehensive about adding faces because they're so focused on the product. But the emotional state of your users is really important, and you want to show how you intend the people to feel when they're using the product. Are they extremely happy? Is this person here a little kind of confused about what's happening with this product? Is it broken? Is this person here also a little like unsure and really confused about what's happening? Or are they a little jealous of these 2 happy people over here? You can, with a few lines, really show how your different characters are feeling, and that's a very important part of your story. And it can communicate it very quickly with just a little bit more work.
Yeah, that's really good. There's a lot more happy people than there are sad people, and I hope you guys are all happy in the audience so far. And we're going to show you how to put this together. But first, we need to talk about a very important piece of a storyboard that a lot of people forget, and I think it's really an essential, absolutely essential piece. And this is the opening slide. And the opening slide is where we like to recommend that you spend just a little bit more time. There's literally 2 places where you want to spend a bit more time: the opening slide and the closing slide. because that acts as a bookends of your story, establishes a sense of place, and then establishes the payoff at the end. So in the opening slide, if you look at this, here's a variety of the ones that I've done. There's a cafe, obviously a busy street, a big bank, and a downtown. And if you watch a lot of movies, you can see some of the similarities there of the opening slide of a storyboard with the opening slide of a movie. That's exactly the same idea. When you're seeing a little French cafe and maybe accordion music is playing in the background, you know it's going to be a romantic comedy. So if you're a male, you may want to just run for the hills. If you're seeing sort of a helicopter panning around and it's a shot of a downtown and the pumping, thumping music playing, then it's a thriller and you may want to stick around, and that may be a fun thing for you to do, to watch together with your significant other. But regardless of how you situate this, the purpose of this slide is to really place your audience in the mindset and the place that you want to be speaking from, you want to be telling a story from. Observe this next slide, for example. This is again from Kevin Chang's book, See What I Mean, and you can see the importance of the opening slide right here. The storyboard on the top has the opening slide and the one on the bottom doesn't. Just compare and contrast the two. You can see it's basically showing a use case for a product called Square. I hope you're familiar with Square. If not, I highly recommend you check it out. It's a very, very interesting product and won a lot of innovation awards. But regardless, you are at the convention center, and right there it says annual trade show. And the hero of the storyboard says, do you take any credit cards? And the seller says, sure, any card you like. They swipe the card through the card reader, which is that Square gadget that you put in your phone. And then the seller says, just use your finger to sign the receipt. And then you can see there's a scene-to-scene transition there. We'll touch on that in a second. That says later. And later on, the seller is then looking at his or her report software, and they can see that how many sales they've done today. Now, if you compare the storyboard on the top with the one on the bottom, that the one on the bottom really skips that annual trade show slide and immediately starts into the transaction. You can see there's a lot of stuff missing there. And the reason why it's missing is you didn't establish the sense of place. You didn't tell them where the thing is taking place, so they're suddenly thrust into this flow. They don't know really what's going on. So before drawing any storyboard, before engaging in this process, ask yourself, where am I? Then draw that space, and then from that opening slide, do the rest of the storyboard. And Will is going to demonstrate to us how to do that with a couple of quick opening slides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for instance, part of the importance of the trade show stories for this one is that it tells you that this is someone who might not be able to have a permanent cash register. They might not be somebody that's used to transactions all the time. So we might have this same sort of story told with a garage sale. So we see a sign that's been tacked up on a light post next to the garage. You see the person's garage in the distance and all their boxes of things they want to sell. There's our bicycle again. We've practiced, and now we can draw it faster. And of course, there's several people out there checking out the different things. The person in the garage smiling because they got that new Square app and they really want to try it out.
Yeah, that guy's like a Cheshire cat. He started with a smile and then
Well,
get
they're
filled in.
very eager to earn some money at this garage sale with their new toy.
Excellent.
So with like less than a minute, you can kind of set the stage, tell the different things that might happen in the story, and put it in a place.
Man, I really want that bike right there. That looks really good. So, excellent job. Okay, so next up, let's talk about another part of the storyboard that you need to get down, which is transitions. And to do that, we need to go back to one of my favorite books, which is Making Comics by Scott McCloud. This entire book is one giant storyboard or one giant comic, and it's a fascinating representation of how you can use some of these same techniques we're using today to create a full-length book. So if you're really interested, I highly recommend you check it out. Now, Scott outlines 6 different types of transitions. One is moment to moment, action to action, subject to subject, scene to scene, aspect to aspect, and non sequitur. Now, in the UX field, we really only care about the top 3, action to action, subject to subject, and scene to scene. We use the other ones rarely, if at all. Let me show you the action to action. Again, this is from Scott's book. And in this case, this is a cool storyboard. You can see the opening slide. The person is preparing to do an athletic exercise. She does the jump, lands it. Her parents say, "You did it. We're so proud." And she says, "Be right back." And she goes to the bathroom and throws up. Anybody who's been to an athletic event can totally relate. Now, me, I've never done anything athletic, so it's all good. Anyway, on to Will, who's going to demonstrate how to do a nice action-to-action transition. And as you can see, this is all a series of actions. So what were you going to show us as action-to-action?
Well, I was going to show with the garage sale example how we could take that into the next step of the action would be getting the customer to complete a sale with this application. So we'll start out with our first panel of the garage sale. And then I'll sketch in the last one, which will be here's our seller off in the distance. And our buyer here is really happy because they've just bought a box of antique Tinker toys. And they're saying, "Thanks for making this transaction easy for me."
So notice he's using the box style drawings of these figures, and there'll be a quiz at the end, so you have to remember which one's which.
Well, it's you can mix them up too. It doesn't have to be just one kind of drawing in your drawings. It's just whatever's easiest. Like on a wider shot like this, doing a stick figure is pretty easy because you don't have very much space to add a lot of detail. But when you get to a closer drawing, you might want to add some more detail. But for a connector for this one, I'll show a little close-up of the seller's phone with their device attached to make the sale. And there are their hands holding the phone. And they're saying, you could use a payment card.
Great, and notice how he's using natural speech and to add detail to the storyboard and to move the story forward. That's also really important. We'll touch on that in our next module.
Yeah, because when you're thinking about what people are going to be saying or thinking, you can use thought balloons too. When you're thinking about the actual dialogue that people will use in these situations, it helps you think about your user a little bit more.
Fantastic. So
So these are my quick hands. They're not my best hands, but as long as you can tell that's the hand, that'll work for us for a very quick storyboard. And notice also I'm using storyboards with some quick word balloons. It kind of helps you show which direction the words are coming from and get a better idea of who's saying what. And if you're like me and you're a little picky, you can always go in here later and make them a little bit cleaner. But for the most part, the storyboards can be really rough. And that's one of the benefits, is that they're really rough, but if you work in pencil, they're really easy to change and clean up if you need to. Fantastic.
Yeah, as long as your teammates and your stakeholders understand what you're trying to say, that's really the important thing. That's the most important. If you've achieved that, then the storyboard has served its purpose. Anything beyond that is just decoration, and it's done for your own good and not for the good of the project. So on to the next transition that we want to cover is the subject to subject. And this one is really interesting and a little bit tricky here because you have to draw a close-up of a face. So in this case, this is actually one of my favorite storyboards. Here, guy Bob says, "Don't you love me anymore, Karen?" And the lady says, "Oh, Bob, you're just so easily distracted." And he says, "No, I'm not, and I can prove it. You see that clock on the wall?" She says, "Yeah." He says, "Well, what about it? Hey, they have nachos." And she goes, "Bob!" So anyway, he's obviously a little bit distracted. But what I hope you can see here is this idea that this is a subject to subject. In this case, a subject is a person. So it's alternating between Bob and Karen. So sometimes we see Bob, sometimes we see Karen. So as opposed to action, there's actually actions are happening. The story's moving forward. The person is jumping in the athletic event, and then she runs to the bathroom, that sort of thing. This is a scene happening at a fixed location in the same place, in the restaurant. These two are just looking at each other, and they're saying things to each other. And one of the aspects of this that we can use in the UX that is different from, say, a storyboard like this is specifically when a person is talking to a device. And I call this Dangerable Robinson. And in this case, the device and the boy are talking to each other. And we no longer perceive the device as a device, but we see it as another person. And when we do UX research, a lot of people refer to their objects, to their phones or to their computers as living things. We say, "A computer said to me," or "My phone told me," and so forth. We even use the same verbs as we would use to a person. So in this case, we can specifically apply the same exact idea to a transition. For example, here's a subject to subject transition where the person is still in the kitchen. So notice it's the same place. She says, "This is terrible. How I can help? How can I help?" And she pulls out her phone, and then the phone is telling her how she can help. So she's talking to the phone. It's a two-way conversation. She's saying something to the phone. She's entering something, pushing a button, and then the phone is talking back to her. So all of these transitions are really subject to subject transitions. So you can see it takes a variety of different ways that you can do this. But overall, it's a fairly effective transition when you need to bring it in. And next, Will is going to demonstrate how to introduce a subject-to-subject transition into perhaps the storyboard you've already done.
Mm-hmm. So we could start off with the garage sale, and maybe we want the same end result, but maybe they can use this phone to also price an item. So they might say, "Well, what is the value of this antique?" And so they go, you can see a little bit of their head as they ask. And I've had the practice from the last slide, so my hand came out a little bit better. And they're entering some information, and they give it a command, and they say, and they try to get it to appraise, give it a quick value of an item that they're looking to sell. And then the phone responds with $20. And even at this view, we can still see a little bit of their face in there. And then that'll also get us to the next panel, because they have a seller that needs to figure out a value, so they were able to get that from this application.
Very nice. Yeah, this is great. So one last part of the important transitions in the UX is the scene-to-scene transition. And the scene-to-scene transitions are actually fairly rare. That's why they were kind of number 3 on our little bar chart there. These happen when the scene changes in a big way from in time or in space. In this case, for example, this person says, "I'm going to sit right here till something good comes on." And his wife or girlfriend walks out the door and says, "Suit yourself." And so 1 year later, he actually turned into a skeleton because nothing ever good comes from a television. unless, of course, you're watching our video. In this case, it is really good. So obviously, he didn't have access to it. And then, meanwhile, in Paris, Thief come back. So as you can see, there was a transition in time. The first one was a transition in time, and it took a whole year for him to turn into a skeleton and truly understand there's nothing good ever going to be on television. And the second one was a transition in space. Suddenly we moved from whatever they were, hopefully, I don't know, maybe in California or something, and then they moved to Paris. So a very long-term, kind of long geographical transition. Now this happens a lot in the mobile, when we're trying to do storyboarding for mobile spaces, because in mobile sometimes it's an asynchronous function. So we're doing something, and then asynchronously we then get a result later on in the process. And Will, could you demonstrate us a scene-to-scene transition, please?
All right. Well, this one, trying to figure out where we could add another scene in here.
We could say later he shows it to his significant other and says, hey, look at the box, or kid or something, and says, wow, look at all this cool stuff that I got.
In these storyboards, we usually tend to use captions very infrequently and try to focus on story bubbles, the word balloons, because that really can focus who's saying what. And if you use the word balloons, it can really kind of force you to get into the mind of the different characters. So one of the few times I would use a caption would be if we're changing location, if you need to say, now we're in New York State, or now we're in a different time. So I'm just going to say later, and note that on the top of the panel. And then we can see that this man is completely overjoyed and bonkers with confused happiness, because now he's happily jumping through a world he's created of Tinker Toys, and they're everywhere. And he's made himself a gigantic house of them. I won't draw them all because that could take quite a while, but I'll just put a couple in there.
And everybody's got to have their obsession. It's it's not UX for everybody. For some, it's Tinker Toys. Wow. That's excellent. So some time passed. Now he's much later. He's built this thing.
He's
up,
completed his
obviously,
life goal.
and completed his life goal. Exactly. It's priceless. Now, Tinker Toys, $20. Completing your life goal, priceless.
Excellent.
So as we mentioned, they were pretty rare. Here's one example that we showed you before from Kevin Chang's book. And notice right there, the seller is saying, right there, there's a caption saying later, let's see how many books I sold today. This is actually a really good point where we can pause and ask you, I did a little bit of a blooper earlier when I was talking about this, and what I said was the hero of the storyboard. Now I want to pause this here for a bit and ask you, based on this last slide, on this final scene-to-scene transition, who do you think is the hero of the storyboard? I'll just give you a second to think about it. If you guessed the buyer, if you guessed the seller, ding, 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 that is true. It is the seller who is the hero here. So this storyboard is aimed at sellers. So when you were showing this to a person, you would be showing this to a seller who would then be buying into the Square service and acquiring the little card reader that they would plug into their phone. So in this case, that final transition is what gives it away that it's actually about the seller. And it's also an important point to mention here about realism. So you can see that in the final example, his last bar is really not as tall as the other bars. So he hasn't sold as many books today as he's done, for example, yesterday or earlier that week. But that just helps add realism to your story. It's not always a straight line to the top, but this one really keeps it real. And that's really important, and we're going to talk about that in the next module. So next, let's touch on some advanced drawing techniques. And this is not for the faint of heart. It's if you've mastered all the previous stuff that we've been showing you here, and you feel like you got this down, please do take a look at this section. For example, in addition to faces that we've talked about, and using the eyebrows to add some expressions there, you can take it to yet another level by adding poses. And poses here, again, this is a shot from Kevin Chang's book. You can see how poses add that extra layer of meaning, and they're able to convey very primal emotions as well as confusion, anger, any sort of mixture of the three. And I think Will is going to talk about how shading these figures really adds another level of focus onto the pose, right?
So for instance, if you were trying to draw someone running, you could draw it several ways. You could try to draw them kind of running right towards the viewer, towards the camera, kind of if you're imagining this piece of paper as a camera. And this person here is running really fast towards the camera. Or you can imagine maybe a view from the side where you're seeing the same action of the character running. But what I want you to think about is outline, because when you look at a drawing quickly, and a lot of these are very quick drawings, what you'll see first is the outline. And a way to get the sense of what the outline of your shapes of your characters look like is to shade it in quickly. And you can see if I shade the person on the right who's viewed from the side in quickly, you can still tell that that's somebody that's running. If you shade the one in on the left, where you're looking at a more front view, it's a little bit tougher to tell what's going on. So choose your poses to try to tell the story a little bit better. Think about what somebody's going to look like if you look at the drawing quickly. If you look at the drawing quickly, if they're holding a phone and trying to interact with it, should they be holding it really closely, or should they be holding it out to the side where you can see what they're doing a little bit better? This kind of action might be good if the point is that they are trying to keep this so that no one around them can see it. But if you want somebody, if that's not part of your story and you want somebody to be able to read your storyboard more quickly, try to keep the outlines of your characters in mind so that people looking at it at a glance can really tell what's going on.
Yeah, they're also really good for pensive slides. If a person is confused and they're thinking, sometimes you can show it with a thought balloon. Show it with a pose just adds that extra layer of realism and mastery to the field. So again, it's an advanced technique. Don't have to use it, but if you feel you got the chops, by all means, go for it. So the other example is camera angles. So I don't know if you've seen a lot of storyboards like this, but this is a typical storyboard in kind of a pre-mobile age. This is a slide I like to show because it's basically a dude looking at the screen, and the next one is the same dude looking at the same screen, and so on and so forth. But the screen really doesn't change. There's maybe other things happening, but the pose of the person doesn't change. And the way to enliven these is you can add camera angles to this. Now, you don't necessarily have to do that a lot with mobile, because mobile interactions tend to move from one place to the next, and that's why we call them mobile. Same thing with anything wearable or tablets. We tend to come to camera angles more or less naturally. But if the person is using a computer, that's where you may want to really interject these camera angles and think about that in a little bit more detail. Also, a lot of the scene-to-scene transitions, like the one of the square and the person buying the book, that was really masterful with the way the camera moved around. This is a couple of other examples here you can see, and Will's going to do one for us right now, where he's going to show you what he already done and then contrast it with maybe a different camera angle there.
Yeah, so for this one we had the view where it was a close-up in between. So maybe we want to show another view of what this could be. Maybe we cut and we reverse the camera angle and show a view from the inside of the garage, and we get the sense that this is a garage that's like the Indiana Jones last shot, and this is completely filled with junk, and this person really needs to sell a lot of stuff. You can see from the back that this is a person who's drowning in possessions and really needs to clear out their garage. So you can switch the camera angle, and maybe you can tell a little bit more of the story that way too. Do you want to zoom out? Do you want to change the viewpoint? it's up to you when you change the camera angle, but you can use that to tell a little bit more of the story.
Yeah, one of the interesting exercises we've done in the past as part of Sketch Camp and Draw Camp events, which we sponsor as well, it's fun drawing stuff like we would do speed drawing of a figure, for example, that changes some aspect or moves around completely every minute. So you literally get 1 minute to draw this thing as best you can, and then the person changes, the model changes position, and you got to draw a different one. The other interesting exercise is to draw things upside down. So you lie down on the floor, literally look up at the subject that you're trying to draw, and you get this completely different camera angle, if you will, out of your eyes. So this is exactly what Will was talking about. This is one way to gain perspective of the scene, and always think of it from different camera angles. And that's, again, advanced technique, adds a little more realism, adds a little more interest to your storyboard, helps bring it together and make it more effective. So once again, we have our Part A, Effective Storyboarding. And in this Module 1, we've covered how to draw basic components of a storyboard, such as things, people, faces, opening slides, transitions, as well as advanced topics like poses and camera angles. So hopefully now you have all the parts of the storyboard ready to put them together, and that's exactly what we'll be doing in Module 2, coming up next.